I was at my computer, lost in lines of code, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Check out this address, your wife might be there." I frowned, thinking it was some kind of prank. Ava would never cheat on me. Shaking my head, I dismissed the message and went back to coding, my focus slowly returning to the project at hand. The next day, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from the same unknown number. I answered, annoyed. "Who is this? I don't have time for jokes." The voice on the other end was serious. "You need to check this address. Trust me." I hung up, frustrated but still not convinced. I pushed the thought aside, diving back into my work. There were deadlines to meet. A few hours later, my phone rang again, same number. This time I answered, my curiosity piqued. "All right, what do you want?" "Just go to the address, see for yourself," the voice insisted. Sighing, I finally agreed. Maybe it was better to get this over with and prove to myself that it was just a prank. I grabbed my jacket and headed out, my mind racing with doubts and questions. The drive was short, but my mind was a whirlwind. Ava and I lived a quiet life in our modest home. Both of us worked hard, though money was always tight. I was a freelance programmer, often pulling late nights to make ends meet, while Ava worked as a cashier at the local grocery store. When I arrived at the address, it turned out to be a small, nondescript hotel. The lobby was nearly empty, save for a bored-looking receptionist and a couple of travelers checking in. I felt out of place in my pill-ridden sweater, but I shook off the nerves and walked up to the desk. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, barely looking up from her screen. Yeah, I'm looking for my wife. Ava Williams?" I said, trying to sound casual. The receptionist frowned, tapping a few keys. "I'm sorry, but I can't give out guest information." Frustrated, I thanked her and stepped back, not sure what to do next. I decided to wait in the lobby for a bit, hoping I might catch a glimpse of Ava or get a clue about what was going on. I found a seat in a quiet corner and kept an eye on the elevator in the entrance. Minutes turned into an hour, and there was no sign of Ava. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. Finally, I decided it was time to go home. Maybe it was all a big misunderstanding. I'd talk to Ava when she got back and sort this out. "Who plays pranks like this on my gullibility?" I asked irritably as I walked back. When I got home, it was late. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator. Ava had a night shift at the convenience store, so the place felt emptier than usual. I tossed my keys onto the table and sank into my chair, the earlier events replaying in my mind. I considered calling the number back to give whoever it was a piece of my mind, but decided against it. There was no time for this nonsense. I needed to finish my work. I easily climbed onto my desk, setting my laptop up and pulling out the notes I had jotted down earlier. My cat, Mr. Whiskers, jumped up onto the keyboard, nuzzling my hand. I scratched behind his ears and he settled down next to me. Usually he slept here at night, but it seemed he couldn't sleep since I wasn't in bed. I went to the refrigerator and made myself a couple of sandwiches, pairing them with a glass of sweet tea. The cold cuts and bread felt comforting as I made my way back to my desk, balancing everything carefully. But my sweet tooth wasn't satisfied, so I grabbed a handful of chocolate chip cookies from the cupboard and munched on a few. Sitting back down, I reflected on my current state. Not yet 40, but already I had a slew of issues from my sedentary lifestyle. My eyesight had deteriorated and I had gone through 3 pairs of glasses with increasingly thick lenses. My back ached constantly from hunching over the computer, and my stomach groaned from the late-night snacks that had become too frequent. Things weren't great, but at least we didn't have a child yet. I imagined how much more stressful it would be if a kid were involved. Mr. Whiskers watched me, his eyes half closed, as I took a bite of my sandwich. The thought of having a child in this chaotic lifestyle seemed overwhelming. Between Ava's odd hours and my freelancing schedule, fitting a baby into the mix seemed impossible. It was a relief in a way that it was just us and Mr. Whiskers. I chuckled to myself, thinking it was probably just a stupid prank. Ava was wonderful, and I was lucky to have her. She was always so understanding about my work and supportive, even when times were tough. Despite our financial struggles, she never complained. Finishing my sandwich, I washed it down with the sweet tea, savoring the familiar taste. My back twinged as I leaned forward, the familiar ache settling in. I made a mental note to stretch more, knowing full well I'd probably forget. I got up, I went and did some squats, some bending over, some stretching. I was relieved. As I continued working at the computer late into the night, my thoughts drifted to Ava. She really was a wonderful wife. We met in our first year at the Institute. I was nothing remarkable then, and I'm not much different now. Ava was the same, unassuming, with no flashy charisma or standout looks, just like me. I studied at the Faculty of Computer Science and Numerical Technologies while she was in marketing. We lived in the dormitory back then. After graduating, we moved into my apartment, got married at 25, and have been together for 13 years now. Even during our student years, Ava didn't stand out in any significant way. She wasn't the type to attract attention, which might be why I never suspected anyone would be interested in her romantically or sexually. I remember the first time I spoke to her. I had just left the classroom and was standing by the window rereading lecture notes. Ava walked past me with her best friend, the only friend she really had back then. They were talking about how her laptop had broken down and she needed it fixed urgently. I was already pretty good with technology, so I gathered my courage and caught up with them, offering my help. Despite my shyness, Ava's plainness played in my favor. If she had been an attractive, made-up woman, I doubt I would have dared to approach her. I went to her dorm and fixed her laptop. After that, we started seeing each other more often. By the time we graduated, we were a full-fledged couple. I remember those days fondly. We'd spend hours in the library, studying side by side. Ava always had a way of making even the most mundane tasks enjoyable. We'd take breaks, sneaking out to get a cheap coffee or sharing a snack we'd smuggled in. Our dates were simple: picnics in the park, movie nights with rented DVDs, and long walks just talking about our dreams and plans for the future. Moving in together after graduation felt like the most natural step. My apartment was small, but we made it our own. We'd spend weekends decorating, finding secondhand furniture, and making the place cozy. I'd be working on my computer, and Ava would be curled up with a book or trying out a new recipe she found online. It wasn't glamorous, but it was home. Getting married at 25 was another milestone. The wedding was a modest affair with just close family and friends. We couldn't afford much, but it was perfect in its simplicity. Ava looked beautiful in her dress, and I couldn't believe how lucky I was to have her by my side. We promised each other forever, and I meant every word. Life after marriage wasn't always easy. We had our struggles, especially financially. Freelancing as a programmer meant my income was unpredictable, and Ava's job at the grocery store wasn't exactly high-paying. But we managed. We budgeted carefully, saved where we could, and supported each other through the tough times. Despite the challenges, we found joy in the little things. Movie marathons on rainy days, late-night talks about our hopes and fears, and quiet evenings spent in each other's company. Ava's laughter was the highlight of my day, and her smile made everything worthwhile. Neither of us had any other sexual partners. At least I never did, and I was certain Ava didn't either. We were each other's first and only. That's part of why these messages bothered me so much. They felt so out of place in our straightforward, unremarkable life. I glanced at the clock, nearly midnight. Ava's shift would be over soon, and I looked forward to seeing her. I knew she'd be tired, but she'd still smile at me, ask about my day, and maybe we'd watch an episode of our favorite show before bed. I chuckled to myself, thinking it was probably just a stupid prank. After hours of work, I finally finished writing the code. As I saved the last file and closed the laptop, a thought crossed my mind. I'd often considered getting a job at a company, but the idea of having to interact with people regularly put me off. Despite various companies assuring me that they could provide an office where no one would enter without my permission, it still didn't convince me. I wanted to work alone, without having to talk to anyone. It was surprising even to me that I agreed to share this story. By the time I had finished, it was already 5:30 in the morning. I had finished all my sandwiches and tea by then, and Ava would be coming home soon. I stood up, stretched, and did a few squats to get the blood flowing. Feeling a bit more awake, I decided to take a quick shower. The warm water helped clear my head, washing away the fatigue. After the shower, I changed into fresh clothes, feeling ready to greet the day and my wife. Just as I was getting ready to put on my shoes, I heard the front door open. Ava walked in looking tired but smiling brightly, as if we were still newlyweds in our first year of marriage, not 13 years in. "Hey, Mason," she greeted, her voice warm and cheerful despite her exhaustion. "Hey, Ava," I replied, giving her a hug. "How was your shift?" She sighed, dropping her bag on the floor. "Oh, it was a night. Let me tell you, this one customer." I listened as she recounted the story. Apparently, a man had come in just before closing, frantic because he needed a very specific brand of baby formula. They had run out and the guy was almost in tears. Ava managed to find a few cans in the back storage, much to his relief. "He was so grateful," Ava said, shaking her head with a smile. "You should have seen his face. It's moments like these that make the job worthwhile, even when I'm dead tired." I smiled, grateful for her kindness. "You're amazing, you know that." She laughed softly. "You always say that." "So, how was your night? Did you get your project done?" "Yeah, finally finished it," I said. "But I'm thinking maybe I should consider looking for a company job. But you know me, I just don't want to deal with people." "Well, you know what's best for you, but whatever you decide, I'll support you," Ava assured me. Her unwavering support always touched me. We talked for a bit longer, catching up on the little things. Despite the strange messages and the lingering worry, moments like these reminded me why I was so lucky to have Ava. The next morning, I woke up feeling a rare sense of relief. My big project was completed, and the payment had already been transferred to my account. It was a free day for both of us, as Ava also had night shift today. We decided to make the most of our time together and do something out of the ordinary. "How about we go for a hike?" Ava suggested over breakfast. "A hike?" I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "We haven't done that in years." "Exactly," she said, smiling. "We could use some fresh air and a change of scenery." We packed a simple lunch, grabbed our gear, and drove to a nearby nature reserve. The day was perfect, clear skies, warm sun, and a gentle breeze. We spent hours exploring the trails, talking about everything and nothing, enjoying each other's company without the usual distractions. At one point, we came across a clearing with a breathtaking view of the valley below. It was in this peaceful moment that Ava brought up a topic we had avoided for years. "Mason," she began hesitantly, "I've been thinking a lot about having a child. I know we've talked about this before, but I really want to be a mom." I sighed, looking out at the horizon. "Ava, you know how I feel about this. We can barely manage as it is. A child would just add to our financial burdens." "But it's not just about the money," she insisted. "Think about the joy, the fulfillment." "I get that," I said, taking her hand. "We can't provide for a child the way we want to. Our life is good as it is, spiritually and emotionally. We don't need a child to complete us." Ava didn't seem happy of my view. "I know, Mason, I just needed to talk about it. Thanks for listening." As we sat there in silence, my phone buzzed. It was another message from the unknown number. "It's in vain that you ignore the obvious. You need to understand this. Anyway, now or later you'll have to—" Frustrated, I replied, "I've had enough of you," and blocked the number. Ava noticed my annoyance and asked, "What happened?" "Just a client being unreasonable," I lied. "I won't take his order. Everything is fine." We continued our hike, but the conversation about having a child lingered in my mind. As we walked back towards the car, we encountered a family trying to set up a picnic. They were struggling with a particularly stubborn folding table. Seeing their plight, I offered to help, and Ava joined in. Together, we managed to get the table set up, much to their gratitude. "Thank you so much," the mother said, smiling. "We were about to give up that thing." "No problem," I replied, feeling a strange warmth from the simple act of helping. Ava exchanged a knowing glance with me, a hint of that earlier conversation in her eyes. Back at home, we settled in for a quiet evening. Ava prepared for her night shift, and I decided to unwind with a book. Despite the lingering thoughts and the earlier message, I felt content. As Ava left for work, she kissed me goodbye, her eyes still reflecting the unspoken wish for a child. After Ava left for her night shift, I settled into my favorite chair with a book. It was a gripping novel, and the further I read, the more I became immersed in its meaning. The characters, the plot twists, everything pulled me deeper into the story. But then my phone vibrated, pulling me out of the fictional world. It was another message from an unknown number. Despite the fact that you took the wrong path, I'm giving you another chance. You are missing out on a lot. And then there was an address. Frustrated and fed up, I typed back, "Fuck you," and blocked the number. I tried to return to my book, but the message lingered in my mind. The address gnawed at me, and despite my initial reaction, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to go. Finally, I made up my mind. I didn't understand why I agreed to go to that address, but something compelled me. I grabbed my jacket, pocketed my phone, and headed out. The streets were dark, the city cloaked in the quiet stillness of night. Ava's shift had started an hour and a half ago, and the absence of her presence weighed on me. I drove through the quiet streets, the city lights casting eerie shadows on the buildings. The address led me to an old motel on the outskirts of town. It wasn't the same place as before. This was a run-down, almost forgotten part of the city. The motel looked abandoned at first glance. There were 4 cars parked outside. I parked and approached the entrance. The dim glow of a few light bulbs provided the only illumination. The place seemed abandoned, yet there was a certain cleanliness to it, as if someone still cared enough to maintain it. The darkness added to the ominous feeling that settled in my gut. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open, stepping into the motel's dimly lit lobby. The air was stale and the silence was almost deafening. As I stood in the dimly lit lobby of the old motel, I heard a voice from the shadows. "Is there anything I can help you with?" It was an elderly woman's voice, soft and a bit raspy with age. I turned to the left and walked about 10 meters towards the source of the voice. There in a small reception area sat an old lady. She had a sweet smile and an air of kindness about her. "Excuse me," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Have you seen a woman about this tall with brown hair, blue eyes? Her name is Ava." The old lady's eyes sparkled with recognition. "Yes, she came here about an hour ago. She asked for a double room and I gladly gave it to her." A cold wave of shock washed over me. "A double room?" I repeated, my voice cracking. "Where is she? Which room?" "Who are you?" the old lady asked, her smile fading slightly. "I'm her husband," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "She should be on the night shift at the supermarket today." The old lady's eyes widened with concern. "Well, she's in room 17. It's down the hall and to the right." I thanked her and hurried down the hall. As I approached room 17, I heard muffled voices. My heart pounded in my chest as I pressed my ear against the door. The voices became clearer. They were discussing money. I heard Ava's voice say, "That's the price we agreed on." The man's voice replied, "Okay, here you go. Keep your money honestly earned." My jaw dropped. The conversation continued with the man saying, "Listen, even though you're so plain, you're just a bomb in bed. I'd love to spend a few more nights with you." Ava's sweet voice responded, "Thank you very much, but that's my job. Mostly sex happens without feelings." The man agreed, "I understand. That's the work of prostitutes and bints, but in bed you are just fire. Keep this money as a tip." I heard Ava happily thank the man. The man smirked. "You know, I still can't believe my luck. I never expected someone like you to be so skilled." Ava chuckled. "Well, you get what you pay for. I aim to please, and it seems I've succeeded." He laughed. "You certainly have. Your programmer is very lucky to have you." He added. Ava said, "Yep, he definitely is." I heard a whisper from a man that I couldn't sort out. Ava laughed softly, a sound that used to bring me joy but now filled me with rage. I tried the door, but it was locked. The door was in bad condition, so I kicked it with all my strength. It fell free from its fastenings with a loud crash. Inside, I saw a small 2-room apartment. On the bed to the left, Ava was sitting completely naked, next to a man I had never seen before. She was putting the money the man gave her into her purse. The room was dimly lit, adding a surreal quality to the scene. For about 3 seconds, there was silence. The shock was paralyzing, but then the silence was broken by the unknown man. He stood up from the bed, first kissing Ava on the cheek. She looked incredibly embarrassed. "Well," he began, "we, in view of myself and your wife, have completed our task. I can be free now." He moved towards the exit, and I, still in shock, let him pass. He stopped near me, put his hand on my shoulder, and said, "Your wife is just fire, especially when she dominates. Don't lose her." He laughed and walked out. Ava started getting dressed quickly, trying to cover herself so I wouldn't see her naked. When the man left, I finally found my voice. "What the fuck is this, Ava?" She sighed, looking at me with a mix of guilt and resignation. "I really didn't want you to find out about this or get involved. But I'm afraid that's what I have to do now," she admitted. "I've been doing this for the last 8 months. I was stunned. 8 months? And how are you not pregnant yet? "Birth control," she replied. "It's still working, and I haven't caught any STD yet, thankfully." "Where does the money go?" I asked. "I haven't noticed any improvement in our financial situation." She took a deep breath, sitting down on the bed, fully dressed now. "My father became an addict. He owes a lot of money to a gang that sells stuff. He's in serious debt. The gang didn't just want to kill him because he owes them a lot. So they contacted me and told me to find the money somehow, or else they would kill him." I felt a surge of anger and confusion. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you go to the police?" "I was scared," she said, her voice trembling. "These people are very serious. They could easily come after us. My father's relatives have locked him up in a hospital to force him to recover. But the debts are still there. If I keep doing this for another 6 months, I can pay off his debt." I stared at her, trying to process everything. "I always thought you were so homely that no one would pay attention to you. But I never considered that prostitutes are often ordinary girls. Clients pay purely for sex, not for beauty or body figures." Ava pleaded, "Please, Mason, don't go to the police. I'm terrified for our lives. Let me do this for another 6 months, and we can put all of this behind us." "And if you get pregnant during these 6 months?" I asked, my voice cold. "Or if you catch a disease? Will you have to continue with prostitution to cover those costs too?" She looked at me, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'll be careful, Mason. I promise. But I don't see any other way to save my father and keep us safe." I ran a hand through my hair, trying to make sense of this. "So all this time you've been lying to me, sneaking around, doing this behind my back. Do you have any idea how this makes me feel?" Ava's shoulders slumped, and she looked down at her hands. "I know, Mason. I know it's wrong. I hated every minute of it. But I didn't see another option. My father's life was at stake." "Why didn't you come to me?" I demanded. "We could have figured something out together. We're supposed to be a team." She looked up, her eyes filled with regret. "I was ashamed. I didn't want you to see me like this, to know that I was doing this, and I was scared that if we went to the police, they wouldn't be able to protect us." I shook my head, feeling a mix of anger and sorrow. "Ava, this isn't just about the money or your father. This is about trust. You've broken my trust in the worst way possible." She reached out, but I pulled back. "Mason, please, I'm begging you, let me finish this. 6 more months, and we can put this all behind us." "And what if something goes wrong?" I asked, my voice rising. "What if they come after us anyway? What if you get hurt or worse?" "I've been careful," she said softly. "I take precautions, and I've only dealt with clients who aren't violent." I let out a bitter laugh. "Clients who aren't violent? You're risking your life every time you do this, and for what? A father who got himself into this mess?" Ava's face crumpled, and she started to cry. "I know, Mason, I know it's insane, but he's my father. I can't just let him die." I felt a pang of sympathy, but the anger was still there. "And what about us, Ava?" She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know, but I want to try. I want to make things right. Just give me a chance." I stood there, torn between my love for her and the betrayal I felt. "I don't know if I can ever forgive." She nodded, wiping her eyes. As we left the motel, the old lady at the reception wished us a good night and a happy family life. We ironically thanked her, and stepping outside, I noticed that one of the cars had disappeared. Clearly the car of Ava's client. I put Ava in the car, and we drove home in silence. The weight of everything that had happened hung heavy in the air. I finally broke the silence. What about the store? Ava sighed. They pay much more for prostitution. Today I even had to ask an old friend from the store to cover for me. Before I started this, I used to go out and work for him sometimes. When we arrived home, it was about 3 a.m. We went straight to bed, exhausted and emotionally drained. The next morning, Ava said she needed a short vacation. I need to get away from all this a little, she explained, her voice shaky. Just a vacation from work, not prostitution. I'm afraid I can't take a vacation from that. I looked at her, my heart aching. Ava, don't go anywhere, and don't even think about going back to this. We'll figure something out. I needed to clear my head, so I decided to take a walk. As I strolled through the quiet streets, my phone buzzed. It was a message from the same number. Well, you didn't regret listening to me, did you? I replied, no, I didn't regret it. Thank you. However, who are you and why are you writing this to me? The response was almost immediate. I think it's time for us to meet. He provided another address, this time to a small pastry shop. It wasn't very far, so I decided to walk there. The pastry shop was small, with only 4 tables. Each table was occupied. An elderly woman sat at one, reading the news on her phone. At the second, a teenager of about 14 years old was engrossed in a game on his phone. The third table had a young student, maybe around 20, staring off into space. At the fourth table sat a man about my age. He was drinking coffee, looking around nervously, and constantly glancing over his shoulder. I guess this was the person I needed to meet. I approached him and asked, "Excuse me, are you the one whom I blocked twice and sent to hell?" He looked up at me and smiled. "Yes, I'm the one who tried to put you on the right path. It took me more days than I thought, but I'm glad you took the right path." The man had a striking appearance. He wore a hat reminiscent of those from the 19th and early 20th centuries, adding an air of timelessness to his look. His face was weathered but sharp, with piercing eyes that seemed to see right through me. He had a strong jawline and a neatly trimmed beard. His clothes were an odd mix of old-fashioned and modern, an impeccably tailored suit that wouldn't look out of place on a mafia don, complete with polished shoes and a vintage pocket watch chain peeking from his vest. He carried himself with an air of authority and mystery, his presence both intimidating and compelling. I sat down at the table across from the man, my mind racing with questions. He looked at me through glasses that seemed to obscure his pupils completely. Before I could say anything, he started talking. "I don't need to introduce myself," he said flatly. "You don't need to know about me." I raised an eyebrow. "Do you really wear such clothes in everyday life?" He smirked, adjusting his hat. "Naturally, every day. I even go to bed in this form without undressing. You could say I'm hiding in plain sight." I couldn't hide my curiosity. "Hiding from who?" "I'm one of the members of the gang that your wife has been dealing with," he revealed, his voice calm and steady. "But now I'm an informant for the government." My jaw dropped. "An informant? And you were put in charge of my wife?" "Yes. She had to come to me to give the money she earned." I was stunned, trying to process this information. "How did you get my number?" His smirk returned. "My colleagues have a lot of resources. We're a large gangster group. It wasn't hard." I felt a surge of anger. "And what do you want from me now?" "The government is preparing a major operation to take down the gang," he explained. "To ensure nothing is compromised, your wife must continue her work. Any deviation could ruin the operation." I was indignant. "You expect me to just accept this? To let my wife continue prostituting herself?" He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "If you interfere, you'll become an enemy of the gang. And given that I've warned you, you'll also become an enemy of the government." A sense of dread settled over me. "What do I need to do?" "Nothing," he replied. "Live your life, program, write software. Your wife should not suspect anything. She must continue what she's doing until the government is ready to raid the gang." He stood up, adjusting his hat once more. "There's nothing more for us to discuss. It's time for me to leave." Without another word, he walked away, disappearing into the bustling streets. I sat there, bewildered and overwhelmed. A few moments later, I heard the voice of the pastry shop worker. "Dear, you haven't ordered anything. Are you going to buy something?" I snapped out of my daze. Yes, I'll have an eclair and a latte." The eclair tasted like sawdust, and the latte did little to soothe my frayed nerves. I sat there for a while, letting the weight of the situation settle over me. Eventually, I stood up and decided to take a walk. The cool air helped clear my head a bit. As I walked through the city streets, a myriad of questions swirled in my mind. The first thing that puzzled me was why I had gone to the hotel in the first place. The receptionist there had told me my wife wasn't there. And then there was the matter of the stranger's clothing. How could someone dressed so conspicuously be hiding? These questions nagged at me, so I decided to send a message to the mysterious man. I sent the message to the stranger and continued my walk, trying to make sense of everything. My phone buzzed with a reply. "You mixed up the addresses and came to the wrong place. As for my attire, you have no idea how members of our gang dress. Don't write or call me again. If I need to tell you something, I will reach out first." I sighed, pocketing my phone. When I returned home, Ava was already gone. I decided to focus on something productive, so I logged onto the exchange platform where I usually find freelance work. Another client had requested a program, and I accepted the job. I threw myself into the work. The hours flew by, and before I knew it, evening had arrived and the software was nearing completion. Ava returned home, looking exhausted. "How was your day?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "You know how it was," she replied, a touch of bitterness in her tone. "But I really believe that in 6 more months I'll be out of this mess." I pretended to accept this, nodding in agreement. "I understand," I said, forcing a small smile. Ava seemed relieved, her shoulders relaxing as she smiled back. "Thank you, Mason. It means a lot to me that you're supporting me," she said. I watched her move around the room, trying to reconcile the woman I knew with the one I had discovered. Despite my efforts to focus on work, my mind kept drifting back to our situation. I had to protect her, no matter how twisted our reality had become. The rest of the evening passed quietly. Ava made dinner and we ate together in relative silence. Afterward, she went to bed early, exhausted from her day. I stayed up working on the final touches of the program. As the hours ticked by, I found solace in the familiar patterns of coding. It was something I could control, unlike the chaos that had invaded our lives. Eventually, I saved my work and shut down my computer. The program was nearly complete, and I felt a small sense of accomplishment. I stood and stretched, feeling the stiffness in my back and neck from hours of sitting. I glanced toward the bedroom where Ava was sleeping. She had seemed genuinely happy when I pretended to be okay with her situation. I climbed into bed beside Ava, who stirred slightly but didn't wake up. The next days passed in a blur of routine and cautious optimism. Ava and I tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. From time to time, we went for walks together, trying to have fun and forget the weight of our reality. Once, Ava stayed out late, something that had become less frequent. When she finally came home, I couldn't hide my concern. "Be careful with all these clients," I told her. "They're different. You never know what might happen." Ava sighed, trying to calm me down. "Mason, I've been doing this for a while now. Everything's been fine so far. Plus, I always carry protection." When I tried to find out what exactly she meant by protection, she evaded the question. I decided not to press her further, despite my worries. 3 weeks later, I was once again sitting at my keyboard, immersed in code, when I received an SMS from that stranger. The message read, "The operation will be carried out soon, from day to day, on a specific date and time which I won't disclose. Just know that your wife's ordeal will soon be over. No need to reply." I breathed a sigh of relief and continued typing, feeling a small weight lift off my shoulders. The next day, as I was lying in bed, ready to drift off to sleep, Ava returned home. She looked as usual, tired but composed. We exchanged the usual pleasantries, and it seemed that the tension between us had eased. We were no longer as embarrassed by the fact that Ava was working as a prostitute. It had become a part of our strange shared reality. But the following day, Ava came home looking different, radiant almost. I immediately noticed her mood. She smiled broadly, tears of joy in her eyes. I don't have to do it anymore. I pretended to be incredibly surprised. Are you serious? How? Apparently the gang is getting raided and they said I don't have to work for them anymore, she explained. I can't believe it. It's over, Mason. I was happy about it, even though I knew it would happen soon. She returned to the store with great joy. I had hoped to hear something about the operation on TV, expecting news reports or headlines announcing the takedown of the gang, but the government kept silent. There was nothing on the news about it. No arrests, no raids. It was as if the operation had never happened. I had hoped to hear something about the operation on TV, expecting news reports or headlines announcing the takedown of the gang, but the government kept silent. There was nothing on the news about it, no arrests, no raids. It was as if the operation had never happened. Days turned into weeks, and life slowly returned to a new normal for us. Ava and I focused on rebuilding our relationship and planning for the future. The uncertainty about the gang and the operation lingered in the back of my mind, but I pushed it aside, choosing to focus on the present and the small victories we were achieving together. I thought about writing to the unknown number, asking for confirmation or clarity about what had transpired. However, Stranger had warned me not to contact him, and I decided to heed that advice. In the end, I never wrote to him again, and I don't write to him to this day. In reflecting on my relationship with Ava, I know some people might not support my decision, but I never considered my wife's actions to be treason. She had no choice, and her actions were driven by a need to protect her family. The idea of divorce never crossed my mind. As time went on, I found myself slowly beginning to share Ava's thoughts about having a child. It could be a powerful incentive to grow, both personally and financially. Now I've added more walking to my life. If I need to get somewhere by car, I rather get out early and walk, often passing by that pastry shop where I met that stranger. His image is still imprinted in my memory, and I can still see him sitting on a stool with a cup of coffee in his hands.